He's one of the most prolific of contemporary American writers and thinkers. And he's founded a school of thought called the Integral School. He's effectively a transpersonal philosopher working in the States. And his work has been very much to integrate all knowledge within an overall schema or framework. The reason he uses the word integral is how can you integrate everything that is known about everything? One of his books was subtitled A Brief History of Everything. So in a sense, my work and Ken Wilber's are quite synchronous. I mean, I've never met him. I've always felt he's a kindred spirit. Where his ideas are useful and where I'm going to bring them in here is in my own PhD, I worked on this notion of transpersonal history. So looking at all the great historical schools that I talked about in the first half, philosophies of history. The question that interests me is how can we integrate them all? You know, what is ultimate truth? Not is what just this truth or that truth, but what is the truth when you put them all together? What's the ultimate truth? And I left out a few. I mean, I didn't talk about Jain philosophy of history. I could have talked about that. I didn't talk about all the complexity of other pagan schools, like the Mayan that you mentioned, and the American Indian cosmologies. They've all got their own time frameworks and sacred time ideas. The quintessence of all that lot is there's something sacred going on. There's sacred time when we think it's just mundane time. There's the soul time and then there's ordinary time. Aboriginals call it dream time, you know. That's what we as human beings are supposed to be doing, it seems to me, is remembering our dream work, our sacred time. So I've looked at the thinkers, in my PhD I looked at the thinkers around on the planet in the last 50 years who've been asking, well, what is the sacred? What is the spiritual? But who've been asking it in a scientific way. Not, well, it's such and such because our dogmatic teachings say that because of such and such a religious text, but rather, you know, scientifically and with evidence, this is what the sacred is. My first mentor in this work was Jung, and I talked about him in a former lecture. Another one that I think has asked this question in real depth is Ken Wilber. And what's he come up with then? He's someone who's studied all the great philosophical teachings. He's an eclectic like me. He's looked into just about everything. And he's come up with a synthesis of his own he calls integral theory. What are his findings? I want to summarise those very briefly. Firstly, that reason and intuition and spirituality are not enemies. A lot of people in the kind of spiritual marketplace, people looking for ultimate truth, say you've got to drop reason. You've got to go beyond reason. You've got to go beyond thought. Ken is one of those people that says, hang on, that's ridiculous, that's dangerous, that's stupid. It's taken us thousands of years to evolve reason and rationality as a species. Out of it comes all the fruits of science, technology, and advanced society. What Ken is saying is, no, we should give thanks for reason, the work of the scientific community, but now we have to go beyond it. Right? So it's not kind of going back to some sort of caveman orientation of pre-rationality, but rather going on to a transpersonal world in which spirituality and rationality can be reconciled. And that's an incredibly important point that a lot of people, you know, don't understand. Let me just quote you from his own writings on this. And this is about also the understanding of the role of ego and the role of the mind. Which is the product of the Western consciousness, particularly. You know, the thinking soul. What do we do with that? Steiner was particularly good on, like, we should work with that, not seek to destroy it. There is certainly a type of truth to the notion of transcending ego. It doesn't mean destroy the ego. It means plug it into something bigger. As Nagarjuna, the Buddhist sage, put it, in the relative world, Atman is real. In the absolute, neither Atman nor Anatman is real. Thus, in neither case is anatta a correct description of reality. Anatta means no soul, no self. The small ego does not evaporate. It remains as the functional centre of activity in the conventional realm. As I said, to lose that ego is to become a psychotic, not a sage. Transcending the ego thus actually means to transcend but include the ego in a deeper and higher embrace. First in the soul, or deeper psychic, then with the witness or primordial self, then with each preceding stage taken up, enfolded, included and embraced in the radiance of one taste. And that means we do not get rid of the small ego, but rather we inhabit it fully, live it with verve, use it as the necessary vehicle through which higher truths are communicated. Soul and spirit include body, emotions and mind. They do not erase them. Put bluntly, the ego is not an obstruction to spirit, but a radiant manifestation of spirit. All forms are not other than emptiness, including the form of the ego.